There are many problems to the moral arguments about veganism and becoming vegan, like there are many problems with several kinds of moral arguments, and these problems don't come from the arguments themselves. Well, they do. These problems are not dependent on veganism itself, or people that seek a plant-based diet, but they do arise because it is taken as a moral. One of the exemplars that I'm going to be taking as an example for this is Kip Andersen Keegan Kuhn. He's the guy who made the Cowspiracy and What the Health movies. Morals are rules that spin out of our beliefs. People with morals believe in a thing completely. A moral can be something helpful, like lend a hand to your neighbor if they need help. There's a danger when a moral becomes an endpoint goal, because it blurs out and grays the means to which you can use to get to that goal. To several conservative people, owning a gun is a right, and that is a moral thing. They overlook things like suicides, mass shootings, and accidents because their moral belief in gun ownership has overrid their belief in the right to life, or the right to a good life. We can see this contradiction the most in stories where someone shoots up abortion clinics with guns. Like, there's our illustration of where our beliefs really lie, and the short-sightedness of possible moralities. My previous video on plant-based diets focused on how meat doesn't have to be in every meal. I touch on data shared in Cowspiracy because I feel like it helps my argument. My argument is not that you should switch over to a completely plant-based diet. It's that you don't have to have meat attached to every meal. I use the practical complications of farmland and how much resources have to go into making meat, and I use those as reasons to not necessarily eat meat. That was the logical side of my argument. The emotional side of my argument was that food is still good. Food without being centered around meat is actually still enjoyable and good to eat, and I like it a lot, and so is exploring what foods you can eat. My video was full of that kind of passion for food and a zest for an exploratory palate and enjoying the things that you eat and the process of making it. For the ethics or moral part of my argument, I pulled a little bit of information from Cowspiracy, because livestock and the things that go into making livestock possible add to our greenhouse gases. And that is making climate change worse, which will destroy our habitat. The moral argument I didn't use for this was killing animals is wrong. And I didn't say that because I don't believe it. Also, I was aiming for a little bit different audience with that argument, because the people that think that killing animals is wrong already don't eat animals and aren't generally looking for an alternative way to cook their food. They already know it. They already call themselves vegan. It's not that that argument is easy to make. I could make that argument if I wanted to, but I don't believe it and I don't live by it. So I feel like it's truer and better if I don't make arguments I don't necessarily believe in. One YouTuber does believe it is Lexi, and she actually just put up a video about ethical consumption of vegan products. And so I can link it down below, and also to her original video where she uses something close to the phrase of, if you consume animal products, you're a bad person. Like, full out. It's unethical to consume animal products. One of the errors from my last video are things that I actually learned from the Cowspiracy. I say 40 pounds of feed goes into making 1 pound of beef, but that is inaccurate. It's actually like around 20, and the number I was thinking of is like 1 calorie of meat takes 40 calories of grain in order to exist, which I put up a graph while editing because I couldn't then find that statistic. So I put up the graph and help people that figure out, but also no one called me out on it. So it's all good. I've gotten ahead of that backlash. That was my mistake. Cowspiracy didn't give me those statistics, I quoted them wrong. There are several things in Kip's work that I really like, and a couple things that I actually learned from him. I took Kip's example and tried to make a plant-based diet acceptable and consumable to the normal person. This is what I tried to do in my video, and it's what Kip does rather effectively. Kip, though, is a bit more of an absolutionist. He sees that moral and he goes for it, which graze a little bit of the areas there. I said positive. I like in Cowspiracy how mindful he is of how much land and resources it takes to raise livestock. how in order to have milk, there has to be a cow that has recently given birth. And we have milk in every grocery store in every city in America. That's a lot of cows that need to have recently been impregnated and given birth. He very well illustrates the conflict of interest that comes with these large food corporations and groups of food corporations like Kellogg's and the United Dairy Workers, and how they get money from the big corporations. And he's able to illustrate that there might be a bias in what research comes out that helps them decide what to do and who to take money from. And not only nonprofit organizations, but also government officials, because they are also paid by Kellogg's and farmers unions. Not farmers unions, maybe farmers unions. Because they're also paid by manufacturers and large corporate livestock raisers like Tyson's. And the bologna one? What's the bologna? I don't remember. Meyer? Not Meyer. Oscar Mayer? Yeah, Oscar. He does a good job of countering the popular straight-up lies that people have, such as plant-based diets can't give you protein. He says it in What the Health, but I kind of stumbled upon it when I did my You Don't Have to Eat Meat video, when I said that that cow needs protein too, and it has to get it from somewhere. And it only eats grass and grain. Kip does it scientifically with a doctor, so I appreciated that a lot, that I was so right. Yeah, me. And I have in my notes here that he counters that soy is feminizing, but I don't actually remember that in the movies. So maybe that is a straight up lie of the internet, but I don't remember Kip tackling. And I really like Cowspiracy as a movie. It's very flowing in how it goes, where it starts out with like a dump of information, and then it kind of chills out with the road trip and interviews, and it trickles on information to kind of build up your suspense in the story, and I think it's very well constructed. I want to make very clear with these positives.
Near communities of color, low-income communities. It is definitely a human rights issue.
My sister, she have asthma, and her brother, he have asthma. He's 3, and we don't know what she might have. I have asthma, I have sinus. I have these area, hog houses and turkey house, is in the black area or the Hispanic area. It's either or.
Do you think it's also a civil rights issue?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
That I appreciate Kip's work and the strong propaganda he's making. And I do think it's propaganda that he's in, probably a little bit more so than me, which I do acknowledge that there's an element of propaganda to this. Any counter-information, counter-story is kind of propaganda. And thank you for watching me. And now I'd like to ask any of the vegans watching to like the video, because this is the fair and balanced part. It's done, it's over. Everyone that quits by now we're about to dive into the bad parts. I want to point out that there's a lot of propaganda and fad diets and kind of this culture of being a fan of eating meat and being a carnivore. And a lot of people pack that into their identity, where they try not to eat greens ever, and they're somehow proud that most of what they, eat is steak. Even tie that to masculinity, which is another whole bag of worms. And that support of this propaganda and interaction with that lifestyle does also support the people in power that benefit from people buying meat and thinking these narrow views of life. Kip is very good at feeding this counter-narrative to the popular propaganda and the popular identity politics of meat eating. Now, the majority of the bad parts of his movies are peer-reviewed data. He uses bad data. It's very important to use data that is repeatable and that other people agree with. Because it's very easy to have one-off study that says that, for example, Ray Richards is the sexiest man in the world. I agree with that study, and it supports my endeavors. But if it's the only thing that says that, then it's probably not trustable. And that's just the bad part that then crawls out a little bit ugly, which was most noticeable to me in his What the Health video, or movie, in his What the Health movie. I did think it was really odd how in What the Health he doesn't reference Cowspiracy at all. They don't cover the same ground, but they are complementary, and I think work well together. But I'm surprised he just doesn't give a shout out. I shout out my other videos when I cross them. I don't know. Subscribe for more videos from me. Kip never does that. Kip doesn't have to ask you to subscribe. He approaches his new movie like his first movie doesn't exist. It's real weird. One of the experts railed against self-acceptance. He railed against self-love, you're perfect as you are, as a cultural thing. And it was real confusing. Like, I'd like to put out a counter to that thought, but other people have already done it. But he rails against people that are obese, saying, no, you can't accept yourself. You can't love yourself as you are because you have a disease. You are diseased right now. Being overweight. That's something that Milo, you-know-who, Yiannopoulos, said in an article verbatim. Shame is good because it motivates people to lose weight. And it is, that is not how that works. And it just shows an overall ignorance to anxiety, depression, and how shame works in a person's mind and what really motivates people to change. I did another video on what helps people change, like 2. That's... how many videos am I gonna... What the Health is very against medical practices such as prescriptions. It's insane. And also backs up alt-right conspiracy theories like how vaccinations give kids autism, which isn't right at all. I guess while we're throwing out bad ideas and bad data,
SIDS and sudden infant death syndrome may play a role in autism.
That was the next one to really... that one really pissed me off. What the Health claims that fat makes you fat, which is an old idea and a very culturally accepted idea, but they paint it as a maligned idea that is completely right and should have never been doubted. And the newer ideas that carbs and sugars also play into a person's health, it completely ignores. They're like, no, fat makes you fat. You can eat as much sugar and carbs as you want. You'll never get fat. And that is not good. That is not, no. No. Peer-reviewed is very important. They get into a bit about heart disease, which it's true that eating some red meats can constrict your blood veins and make it so that you have a higher blood pressure, which is part of heart disease and how it gets in there. They claim that meats completely coat your thing and literally attack your blood cells, like little jacks attack things. And part of how that happens is they say that animal proteins are different from plant proteins. Like, you can get protein from plants, but it says that once that protein is in the cow's body, it morphs into a different kind of protein that literally attacks your blood. Animal digestion just turns them into ninja jacks that attack at your blood and make you unhealthy. It also claims that meat causes literally every disease. And the movie uses this logic to blame every death and casualty because of any disease on meat. And it does this with a hilarious computer-generated thing of 747s crashing out of the sky every 40 seconds because that's how many people die from diseases that the movie just claimed are caused by meat. The movie claims that stopping eating meat will cure diseases. Very weird and most sketch. It shows this woman that has hip arthritis, and in the beginning of the movie she needs to walk around with a walker and can barely move around her house, which is very sad. And she's like eating 1 million pills from her doctor to get over it. And then she moves to a plant-based diet. And at the end of the movie, she looks a lot better. She's like cleaned herself up. She's walking around the street. She's still kind of hobbling. And like, it's supposed to be like, oh, full recovery because she stopped eating meat. But I don't know if that's true. Like, even in the closing interview, there's still like her walker in the background. Like, they couldn't edit that out completely. That was weird. It's weird. It is a shocking and like powerful moment in the movie, but also I don't know how true it is because this guy doesn't believe in studies. Sparring from the biggest problem this movie being its bad studies that it uses is there's a lot of holistic doctors that it references in its crapping on normal medicine. And that's a whole other bag of worms. And actually there's a lot of videos by the Rational Skeptic who talks about holistic medicine, and also there's a pretty good Bill Nye Saves the World on it. But either of those you can go watch. So I'm going to skip over here, just like, ick. And it's also really down on doctors, like the entire way through. They're very anti-doctor, which is very weird and questionable. And they say things that pretty much are flat out wrong, such as doctors never suggest that you change your diet to become healthier. I'm pretty sure every sitcom has an arc where someone has to stop eating red meat because of their heart disease. It happened to Zay Frank. He literally does a video about how his doctor told him to stop eating meat.
For my physical, and I was like, what's up, doc? Penis! That's how you tell a story. Not really. Listen, he said that I have a cholesterol score of 258, and I was like, score? I didn't know we were playing a game. But then I realized that he was telling me a list of foods that I had to eat from now on. And I kept on waiting for him to move on to one of the other food groups, like the fried group, or the covered in sauce group, or the wrapped in individually wrapped packages group, but he totally didn't. And then he said I couldn't eat bacon, and that's when I almost said, why do I have to eat the stuff on this list again? And he said, otherwise in 20 years you'll die.
But they make this claim that doctors never talk about diet in order to become healthier, which I'm pretty sure is wrong. That's flat out wrong. Near the end of What the Health, if you're watching this movie and you're like, okay, maybe moderation, maybe I'll do like what Ray said in his video, and I just won't have meat for every meal, and I'll have a nice balanced life. Like, their argument against life balance like that is, but then you don't have miracle cures. You won't get a miracle cure if you eat meat once in a while. Apparently, miracle cure from plant-based diet works off Scott Pilgrim rules. If you want to go over the fact-checking in details, there's 2 articles that are very helpful that helped me out a lot with the research of this video. The first one is sciencebasedmedicine.org/What the Health, a movie with an agenda. They fact-checked the What the Health movie. And the other one, which I really liked a lot, was climateandcapitalism.com. And they have a 2016 article about the Cowspiracy movie. And then one non-facty based bad thing I didn't like about What the Health is that unlike the structure of Cowspiracy, What the Health is just an hour of barraging information. Instead of like the other movie where there was a bit of a dump and then they trickle information, What the Health is a constant barrage of information and explanation at you about not eating meat and how meat causes diseases, and it never stops, and there's never a breather where you can digest the information that you've been given. The movie criticizes the health industry's overload of information, that whatever you want to do, you can find information and studies to support what you want to say. And he criticizes that. But you know, the way to counter that is the peer-reviewed studies, which you didn't do. Instead, you found something that said what you wanted it to. And then you filled your movie with white noise to say the one thing that you wanted to, instead of letting people think about what you were saying. Like, he meets with the FDA president, the spokesman of it, and is like, why didn't you do anything about this study that says the meat causes cancer? He meets with somebody. It's probably not FDA. And the guy says, non-peer-reviewed studies can't be trusted. And the guy has a point! Thanks for keeping it in the movie, that I can see that you're blowing off because you're not using peer-reviewed studies. It would be a lot better for your movie and your case if you can come back with, yes, it is peer-reviewed. There are other people that studies said the same thing. You could do that, and that would be very powerful in your movie, and you might even get his attention to change things. But you didn't do that. Let's calm down. Let's recenter ourselves. Everyone who came here that wasn't happy with the positive part of the video, but likes now that I've started criticizing veganism, hit the like button now. This is your time for that. You just got your part of the fair and balanced. So it's not bad to have an info dump part of your movie. It's very important that the audience has context for the information that you're about to have and about to see in the video. It's a very important part of every documentary to start with something that gives you information, so then throughout the movie you can use what you've learned from the beginning and apply it to every example that you see in the movie. The problem is there aren't really any examples, and there's no downtime to apply what you've learned in the beginning of the movie. There's no pacing. It's all up in the air, blast, blast, blast. But let's focus on the framing of the movie, the propaganda of it. What Kip and other vegan supporters say is that adopting a vegan lifestyle, of course, Kip doesn't use the word vegan, but maybe twice and maybe by other people. Kip says plant-based diet because he's making it digestible to the people that watch. The framing is that choosing a plant-based diet is revolutionary, that you are changing the world through your consumption. Kip is advertising a plant-based diet. The movies are ads to get you to buy something for this market solution. He criticizes politicians and watchdog groups for taking money from large farming corporations. But he does not suggest an actual revolutionary change. The change that he suggests is on you, the individual, and he doesn't blame the system that those corporations and those politicians are a part of. This is my major problem with his movie and vegan morality claims, because they put the blame on you, that you need to eat no meat, that you need to stop buying things that are made out of meat and animals, and that it's your fault that things are this way currently, because people like you bought too much meat-based products. But he doesn't look at the system. He doesn't say, maybe there should be a public support for surveys to find out what is really healthy. Maybe our politicians shouldn't be able to accept money from these private corporate interests. The writer of the Climate and Capitalism article that I read said a quote that I like, "Please do go vegan, but remember that it won't lead to political change by itself. Look for groups and campaigns that are pushing for meaningful action on this issue, who have good and thoughtful strategies for challenging the culture of mass meat and dairy consumption in industrialized nations. The only way to get change is to ask for it and demand it, and to say where the system is wrong and where the system needs to be fixed, or suggest new systems entirely to replace it." I talked about this in my anime activism video, that consumption is not activism. And when you present a market solution, a thing for people to buy, as activism, such as buying Nikes or not, or watching a certain anime or not, or giving money to Crunchyroll or not, you are not supporting resolution and change. You're just participating in the current system. And participating in the system will not change it. Kip even realizes this in his movie. He shows it in What the Health, where if an animal dies, a cow dies, a pig dies, they're not used for human meat of disease. They're then put in bins on the side of the road in order to be sold to someone else to be made into a different product. Or sometimes they're shipped to other countries because we have a global market. He sees this, that even if people don't buy it or if it doesn't go into meat, it's still used in some other part of our industry because that's how our system works. And he has no solution for this. He just cites it as a gross out factor for his propaganda. Oh, there are dead pigs and they're just lying beside live pigs until they're picked up and put into a bin to be made into cat food, or to be sold in Mexico. Kip cites other systematic problems that prop up the meat industry, but he doesn't suggest changing them. Kip acknowledges that USDA subsidies make burgers cheap and cheaper for people to buy, is a fatty, sugary food, which if people eat mostly that in their diets, they become obese and get several kinds of diseases. True, not all diseases, but it does cause health effects. But he doesn't suggest that people write their congressman, or write the SDA, or suggest they subsidize healthier things. He says, just buy vegan. So I'll say that. Write your congressman that you don't like the USDA subsidies going to junky fast food. Write your congressman that you want support for small and local farmers and not support for large corporate farmers that get the bulk of our subsidies. That you want to help small farmers and local co-ops be able to grow and sell and ship their food to you. And then you can buy from small farmers and local co-ops. But do it with an expectation that you're still within the system when you do that. Doesn't even suggest that you vote for politicians that support that kind of stuff. Kip wants you to vote with your dollar. Now, if you're able to piece together the things like I did and like climate and capitalism did, there are things that Kip says and avoids saying, certain buzzwords he lets into his movie that speak to a certain demographic of people. And I'm not just talking about the technique where he blue screens his hat in front of a different shot of a river at an angle where it'd be impossible for him to stand and look directly down into the water. Like, these are two different angles. You look down in water, you look across the river at water. You don't have your hat there. That's a crazy angle. He rarely uses the word vegan. He puts out signals to anti-vaxxers. He even has a doctor say another alt-right thing, that milk has estrogens in it that are feminizing. There's a certain demographic of people that believe that. And the article on climateandcapitalism.com accurately points out that Kip is targeting a less discerning middle-class audience with his movie in order to spend money on vegan products. This is why the jabs at vaccines, estrogens, masculinity are all in there. It's why at the end of the movie he interviews a bunch of bodybuilders that I would never try to disagree with, and athletes that are vegan and say that they're at the top of their life, which is, if you've ever talked to anyone who does bodybuilding or lifts weights, is what they always say. They're constantly on that hype train. I'm in the best shape of my life. I love everything I'm doing right now. Whatever I'm doing now is the best, and they have to believe in it because that's just like what they do and how they spend their time. Everyone who lifts weights just talks like that about everything they're doing currently right now. Bodybuilders are a terrible source of information. Except for posture. They've got the posture, stance, and how to lift weights. Good. Anything else, any other information from a bodybuilder is questionable and you should ask for peer review. They are easily confused by scientific terms and names of complex proteins. Kip also takes the time to hand-wave away several other arguments against an all-plant-based diet, saying that, oh, it's like so affordable. It's like $20 a person for a week. You can buy this stuff. You just have to cook for 40 minutes. You can just take that time to do it. And not everyone has that kind of time to eat or cook. Like, I kind of say that in my video, but I also acknowledge that not everyone can or has the luxury to do it. But let's give Kip a break, right? Because he is doing some important work. Let's take a wider scope other than this movie. Kip was just one example of the wider flaws that I think there are in veganism moral arguments. All right, I'm done ragging on Kip. Let's look at the wider system. Our morality comes from our surroundings, our beliefs, but those things are also part of a system of the culture that we are a part of. Our society helps dictate our beliefs and what we think is important. And part of those structures are USDA subsidies, commercials, and this propaganda that eating meat makes you a man, that grilling is the highest form of things to do in your day off, that when smoked meat is the best. And they have a point. We bought liquid smoke and it has revolutionized our dishes. But at the same time, those are all powerful normalizers to support the system that we're currently in, and that is constantly doing harm to people and animals through the questionable corruptions of money. There are powerful images and arguments that are part of Kip's movies. Our corrupt legal structure and the things that morally we make people focus on ignore the flaws of our system. A system that supports and encourages companies to put animals in as small cages as possible, to abuse them, to feed them weird mulchy nothings. When Kip shows these farms and those locations and the environment of these animals that we use to live, those are real. We really do that to cows. There are really dead chickens and diseased pigs among other pigs. And it can be days in giant labyrinths of chicken cages before that is necessarily found. The image of 2 giant bins full of dead pig corpses is a powerful image. And it's a real image. Something that our system made, produced, and Kip was able to see on the side of the road. Or not. I'm not sure how much of this documentary is flawed, but a part of our system and our way of life is fanaticism, being a fan towards something. Video games, movies, comics, veganism, carnivores. They go off the same system. The goal of being a fan is to be a super fan. You can't just watch Rick and Morty, you need to watch Rick and Morty, get the video games, have all the shirts, buy a tattoo, dress up as Rick every Halloween and have a life-size bust of him, because that's the super fan, that's the coolest. That is the goal of every fandom, to consume more and more products of whatever the fandom's part of. The goal of veganism is to wear the tight is to wear the shirts, get a low-impact car, buy organic food, look for makeup that's not tested on animals. Cruelty is important, but I don't think that eating animals is wrong, so I didn't make that argument, and I don't make those arguments. And I think a large part of several of the eating animals makes you a bad person kind of crowd is being that fan, that ultimate thing, like, I am better than you because I believe this thing, and I excommunicate you because I'm so pure and so much better. None of us are better than anyone else. We're all in the same system that is flawed and that uses those flaws to take advantage of us and actively make the world worse. People that love animals, who are fans of animals, elevate the rights of animals above those of humans. And that isn't hard to do, especially in how capitalism makes us all isolated and divides us up into us and them groups. Peer-reviewed studies have shown that in-groups and out-groups are very powerful. That even people, when they're put in a situation where they don't understand what they're doing, in order to be part of the in-group and part to belong, they will do that behavior, standing up whenever a bell rings. And then, when new people come in that did not witness the other people standing when a bell rings, the person told them and educated them how to fit in, even though none of the original group is present. Regardless of age, race, height, or ethnicity, people can be put into a group and then made to identify with that group will think that everyone in that group is more like them in age, looks, height. Will think everyone is similar to them. And people in other groups that may look exactly like the person are all by default different because they're not part of the in-group that the subject was given. With that kind of mentality, it's easy to see how someone could risk going to jail or harming other human beings in order to free animals. A group of bunnies in cages, cows being milked. It's easy to see how they can devalue human rights over those of animals, because that's how the marketing and identity of being a vegan work. America is a bit of a unique place because several people within their social group don't identify with the other people in their social group. Americans have this mentality that they're just slightly inconvenienced millionaires. A lot of people identify with millionaires and millionaire problems and disassociate with people that might even be the same as them. My favorite example of this is a friend of mine who's a single mother at a time and relied on food stamps, and how she was constantly sharing articles and opinion pieces that people who depend on food stamps are bad people, despite the fact that she was one. She called people that used food stamps as lazy and wasteful and that were wasting our tax money on them, and she was one. She wasn't lazy. She thought that other people on food stamps were lazy and did not see past the contradiction there, that maybe not everyone on food stamps is lazy, or that maybe someone is manipulating her to be the super fan of the millionaire. Capitalism says you are a millionaire, but everyone else like you is lazy and deserves how little they have, except for you. You can be a millionaire. Work for it. Talk about how these other people don't deserve it. Self-help gurus teach people to envision themselves becoming millionaires, selling books, becoming rich, that they are part of the rich lifestyle. That capitalism is good because they make people rich, and it could make you rich. But it doesn't. And they don't. And most people die poor, thinking that one day they'll become rich. They don't want the wealthiest people in America to be taxed their fair share because they have the majority of the resources of America. Because they're like, one day I might be rich and I won't want to be taxed. People with means don't know what it feels like to never have time, to work 3 jobs, to have to skip meals. They disassociate those needs with things that people have. It's easy to go vegan, you just need to go vegan and buy the food and cook it, or have someone cook it for you, or eat at this vegan restaurant. It's easy. You just need to choose to do it. And they don't think about how some people don't have the choice. It's easy when you have the means to just love pink pigs. Pink pigs are adorable, and I have pictures, and they have walls, and I even have a little teacup pig, and I go and I pet them at petting zoos. And it's easy to shame every poor soul who eats pork. They're wrong, and they're bad for killing adorable, tiny, cute piggies. But the alternative to that is to eat meat all the time, right? We can't find a good middle ground because of the system that we're in. A middle ground doesn't make money, as well as being a fan of one side or another. I think people should eat food. I think farmers and incorporated farmers should be regulated, and that animals should be treated fairly and not cruel. And I'm not surprised that the same system that incentivizes Tyson's chicken to throw their chickens off balconies and punch them and hit them with blunt objects is the same system that would leave people dying without health care or without health treatment. The same system that would pressure doctors to subscribe as many medicines as possible to a person who might need them, but might not need all of them. The system that allows drug companies to advertise directly to people instead of let doctors decide what their patients need. I'm not surprised that a system that does such terrible things to people would do much worse things to animals. I do a lot of writing and scripting on these videos without doing a lot of research. The point of that is to start discussion. I want responses from people. I want people to tell me where I've made a mistake, where I'm wrong, where I haven't listened to people, an angle I haven't thought of. I don't want to be presumed to be an authority on anything, and I am not. And that's hard to do when you state your opinion, because how you state a good opinion and a good argument is by assuming you're right, and by putting out the facts that you know. There is a certain way to make a video essay so that it's crisp and professional and seems like the absolute truth when that absolutely does not exist. If I put a video about why people should eat less meat or don't have to eat meat, and a point jumps out to you, like he didn't mention that eating animals is wrong, that's because I want you to think of other things that I didn't talk about, that I didn't mention, to see the bigger web of what we are doing and what we are acting in. I want you to think as a starting point. I may say things that are inaccurate, such as it takes 40 pounds of grain to make a pound of meat, but it isn't wrong, and it makes you think, and that's the point. It doesn't disprove the point. You still have that impression. My figure is wrong, but with the correction, my point still stands. There would be a problem with my last video if it actually took half a pound of grain to make a pound of meat. Then raising animals would make sense. We are up against a gigantic amount of misinformation that supports the status quo of market solutions, of spending money to make change that doesn't happen. The goals of lessening emissions, making sure that animals aren't tortured, and making sure that our planet doesn't turn extremely inhospitable forgives the bending of statistics. I don't like that Kip didn't use peer-reviewed studies, but I don't disagree with his point, with the point he is trying to make with thrust. The needs warrant an exaggeration. If exaggeration is what it takes to get the middle-class Americans to eat some kale once in a while. Now that the audience understands how much corporation money twists the arms of watchdog groups, now that they're all right with eating kale, they might go to spaces where someone will tell them what they can do to stop that kind of corruption. Kip's data is off, but it isn't wrong. Increasing a correlated chance of a disease is real. Inflating the importance of a correlation might not be accurate, but that disease is still real. We do put a lot of resources into feeding animals than it would take to feed ourselves. The massive amount of meat our system cultivates does produce a stupid amount of greenhouse gases and wastes, but it isn't 50%. There isn't anything wrong with a plant-based diet or a moderate diet. There is a massive system that is actively making our planet worse for its own profit, and the system trains us to defend it by tying its faults with our own identities. One illustration that Kip uses is that meat and eggs don't advertise as being healthy, that legally they can't claim to be part of a complete breakfast or good for you. Instead, those eggs tie into your identity, into things you value. Dinner is family time. They want that taste to be tied to positive emotions and masculinity. These are tropes that have played out on TV for decades. That is a lot of propaganda to overcome. And perhaps against all that, an audience wouldn't change their behavior based off 15% of emissions, because that seems like nothing to them. Humans are bad at statistics. They don't change their behavior based off correlated risks of heart disease. A figure of a risk of heart disease goes from 2.9 to 3.4, but humans can recognize big, sweeping dangers. So maybe the proper thing to do is to illustrate how much danger people are in by making it seem immediate. Perhaps it's fine to inflate a 15% of our emissions to 50% of emissions if that's what it takes to make people fix it. In order to get people to improve their diets, maybe it's better to show people that a big 50% on the screen, which is the increase of their risk of disease, instead of showing what risk overall they have of disease, in order to stir action in the normal person. The system that does this is capitalism. There are no ethical consumables in capitalism because nothing is made ethically, and everything is tied to everything else that is also made unethically. Capitalism is a global force, so individual choices of people cannot change it and are not good action. But we can change it. The system used to be different before and it changed to this one. It can change again. We can found a new system. And on the way, we could eat a little bit less meat. We can send letters to congressmen. We can be mindful of the animal and human abuse in the system. We can be mindful of how our resources are really used. And maybe to get people to join our side, we can recommend one of Kip's documentaries. When someone points out that a figure in the movie might be a lie, we can say no, it's inaccurate, but the problem and the point still stands. The problem is real. Oh man, maybe share this video with a friend. I would love to hear your thoughts down below. Subscribe for more. But seriously, peer-reviewed studies are very, very important. So cute. Yeah, I know, I have things all over all your stuff. I know, I'm sorry.